Hey everyone, this is George of YouTube channel Uncanny George, and in honor of Halloween, today I'm doing my top 5 favorite horror films. I'm a huge fan of horror films. I've loved them since I was a kid. I used to be really scared of them, and I still kind of am scared of them, but I love watching them. I love the stories, I love the crazy monsters and crazy killers, so that's why I thought it'd be really fun to do a top 5 favorite horror films list. Some of the honorable mentions include Hellraiser, 28 Days Later, 28 Weeks Later, From Dusk Till Dawn, the Jason films, the Freddy films, the Halloween films, Invasion of the Body Snatchers, The Fog. I could just keep going on. There's so many horror films that I really love and really enjoy, but unfortunately there's only 5 on my list, so I'll go ahead and get to those. Number 5 on my list is none other than the George Romero classic, Night of the Living Dead. For those of you who might not be familiar, the premise of Night of the Living Dead is that for some mysterious unknown reason, the dead have come back to life and they're feeding on the living, and basically everyone's doing whatever they can to escape. I actually didn't see this movie until I got to college. One of my friends, she let me borrow it. She thought because I'm a big zombie fan, I should have already seen it, and she was right. I didn't actually like this movie when I first saw it. I thought it was kind of boring. I wasn't into the whole black and white classic theme. But you know, as I got older, I came to really appreciate this movie, and it's now one of my favorite movies. There's so many really interesting details in this movie. The characterizations, the set pieces, the movements, everything about this story is really interesting, and I love how groundbreaking it is. In this day and age, you wouldn't bat an eye watching this movie. I mean, zombies, we see worse. But if you try and put yourself back in the mindset back when this movie first came out, this stuff was terrifying. And there's so many really interesting twists and turns in the movie with character deaths that are really unexpected. And I won't spoil anything for you, but the very ending of the movie is a complete shocker that I really didn't see coming. I'm also just a huge zombie movie fan. I know there had been previous zombie films made. For me, this is the archetype. This is the original zombie flick. This is what I go back to whenever I'm writing or reading about zombies. One of the other things I love so much about this movie is the director, George Romero. He gave everything he had to make this movie. This movie came so close not to making it. There were so many roadblocks in his way, and yet this movie still came out, and it's gone on to be more than a cult classic. This is just a staple of horror film history right here. And so that makes me appreciate this movie that much more. I really love Night of the Living Dead, and I can't recommend it enough. I think if you love zombies, you should at least give it a chance because it is such a classic, awesome horror film. And that's the number 5 entry on my top 5 list. The number 4 entry on my top 5 favorite horror films list might come as a surprise to you. It is The Frighteners. You might be wondering why The Frighteners is on my top 5 favorite horror films list. It's not exactly a terrifying film. It's not exactly a comedy. It's somewhere in between. The Frighteners is actually about a guy with kind of a dark, mysterious past, and he can see dead people. He actually doesn't want to help these dead people, but he's kind of forced into that role. I remember when I first saw this, I was a kid, and I was just really interested. I liked the computer graphics. I thought it was kind of interesting seeing these computer graphics for the first time. They looked a little weird, but to me there was something interesting there. And the other thing that I really loved about this movie as a kid was Michael J. Fox. This is definitely a hidden gem. If you're a Michael J. Fox fan, you should definitely track this down because it is a classic movie. He is awesome in this movie, but he's not the only thing that's awesome about it. This is actually also one of Peter Jackson's earliest films. And by Peter Jackson, I do mean the Peter Jackson who directed the Lord of the Rings films. There's actually a really awesome cameo in this movie from R. Lee Ermey, and he's just hilarious as this gun-wielding, crazy spook ghost guy. There's a lot of really cool things about this movie. I really think if you're a horror film fan, this is something you're going to want to track down. And that's why The Frighteners takes the number 4 spot on my top 5 list. The number 3 entry on my top 5 favorite horror films list is one that I'm sure has given tons of people nightmares. It is The Exorcist. The Exorcist is actually about a young girl who's possessed by a very powerful demonic entity, and 2 priests kind of have to join forces to help this girl. You might be thinking that this is just a throwaway, that hey, he just put The Exorcist on here to have The Exorcist. No, I actually really do love this film. Yes, it's terrifying. This movie gave me so many nightmares. I hate to admit it, but the first time I watched this movie, I slept with the lights on. I'm not gonna lie, I just did. But it is really phenomenal. After repeat viewings, I really came to appreciate the story. This movie's really interesting, and for me, it really is a story about a priest who's lost his way. That's not the only thing to love about this movie though. There's projectile vomit, there's crazy twisting heads, there's a demon inside of a little girl, and it is a terrifying creature. So yes, this movie is one of the most terrifying movies I've ever seen. This movie actually still gives me nightmares, so yes, this movie is scary. But there's also a lot to like about it. It is very interesting. Other than being a really terrifying movie, it actually has a really great story. For me, no matter what the story is, it could be a romance, it could be a comedy. If it has a great story, it's gonna draw me in. And The Exorcist actually does have a really great story, and it is very character driven. Other than scaring you enough to where you might wet your pants a little bit, The Exorcist is actually really well worth watching. So for me, I just really love this film, and there's a lot of reasons to love it, and that's why it's the number 3 entry on my top 5 favorite list. The number 2 entry on my top 5 favorite horror films list is a remake. Yes, I said a remake. It is the remake to Dawn of the Dead. Dawn of the Dead is actually Romero's sequel to Night of the Living Dead. This is a remake of that movie, but again, it's the same premise. Zombies are coming after you, you run away, or you get eaten. This film actually barely edged out the original film and Zombieland. Those two are some of my favorite films also, but I'll tell you why I love this film. This is actually the first horror movie I actually went to go see in the theaters. I remember watching this the night I graduated from high school, and I was just blown away by it. I love the action, I love the zombies, and I love the characters. For me, this wasn't just one of my favorite horror films, this is one of my favorite movies ever. And yes, I love the original, yes, I love Zombieland. I really enjoy this movie because it's such a cool update, and it's so well done. And for me, running zombies are terrifying. I know some people don't care. They think I like the slow zombies better, but for me, I like the fast zombies because they are terrifying. Like, there's literally no hope here. When I was a kid, I remember being terrified because I was thinking about, well, I don't run very fast, what am I gonna do? When I saw this in theaters, I remember wanting to shit my pants. The reason I thought about shitting my pants is because I do not run very fast. I've never run that fast, and these zombies take off. They're like freaking velociraptors, and fast zombies will track you down and eat you. For me, not running that fast is kind of a death sentence. So this movie scared the crap out of me. That's what also really got me interested in this movie. I've watched this movie so many times. I've watched it over and over. It is such a fun film, and repeat viewings are always fun. Zack Snyder is the director of this remake, and I thought he did a great job. After watching this movie, it made me really interested in Zack Snyder and what he's doing. He went on to do 300, Watchmen, more movies, but for me, this is the Zack Snyder movie that I always go back to, and I really enjoy it a lot. So if this movie wasn't so awesome, you'd probably be getting the original Dawn of the Dead or Zombieland. But for me, I had to choose this Dawn of the Dead, and that's why it's number 2 on my top 5 list. The number 1 entry on my top 5 favorite horror films list is none other than John Carpenter's The Thing. Hands down, this is my favorite horror film of all time. I've watched this movie over and over. As a kid, this movie not only terrified me, but it got me really interested in science and space. For those who aren't familiar, this is actually a remake of the original film. The story of this film is that a group of scientists make a terrifying discovery that not only threatens their existence, but the existence of all living things on the planet. I really think if you're a horror film fan, this should be something you should watch because it is one of my favorite films. It is terrifying and it's really interesting. This is a very character-driven movie. One of the most interesting things about this film is that there's a small cast, and it's actually a cast of all men. The actor who plays the lead in this movie is Kurt Russell. Yes, the legendary Kurt Russell. I think Kurt Russell is awesome at anything. I'm a huge fan of Big Trouble in Little China. I love a lot of his work, but for me, this is the Kurt Russell movie that I'll always go back to. And one of the things that I love about this movie is that they use practical effects. And I watched the special features in this movie, and sometimes it was just extremely difficult to do these things, but they still managed to do it, and they did it with practical effects. And so this movie is just phenomenal. The creature design, the directing, the characters, Of course, Kurt Russell's phenomenal here. This is also a John Carpenter movie, and this is my favorite John Carpenter movie. This movie is just awesome on so many levels, and if you haven't seen it, I really think you should check it out. It's not only one of my favorite horror movies, it is one of my favorite movies. If you like terrifying movies with incredibly horrifying monsters, The Thing is definitely something you should check out because it is such a great movie and I can't praise it enough. So that's it for my top 5 favorite horror films list. I hope you like the show. Let me know in the comments below if you agree with my list, disagree. If you have any suggestions for some really cool horror films that I should check out, comment below, let me know. And if you also enjoyed watching the show, check out my other videos. Like, subscribe, comment. I really appreciate your support. And as always, thank you for watching.